As the functional approach to medicine continues to evolve, we are now witnessing the emergence of a powerful systems-orientated model capable of addressing the healthcare needs of the 21st century. In April 2016, Bioceuticals will be holding the 4th Bioceuticals Research Symposium to provide healthcare professionals with leading, cutting-edge research highlighting the future of integrative and functional medicine. We've chosen the world's leading functional medicine experts to show you how they integrate the explosion of research with the latest in genetic science, nutrition and metabolic medicine. For more information, please visit the Bioceuticals website at bioceuticals.com.au. This is FX Medicine and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook, and joining me in the studio today is Dr. Robert Buist. Now, Bob earned his Bachelor of Science with honours in biochemistry at the University of New South Wales and was then awarded his PhD in medicinal chemistry at Macquarie University, completing postdoc studies at New York State Health Department working on thrombin inhibitors. His research covered cutting-edge work on pharmaceuticals for asthma and heart disease. Personal illness while travelling the Asian greyhound route in the 1970s was the catalyst for a change in career focus, and this led to further studies in chiropractic and naturopathy. Before long, he was teaching nutritional medicine while formulating nutritional supplements and functional foods. One of the founders of nutritional medicine in Australia, Bob is or was the director of the International Academy of Nutrition, editor-in-chief of the International Clinical Nutrition Review, and author of 4 best-selling books, including Food Intolerance, Food Chemical Sensitivity, The Cholesterol Myth, and his latest one, Love Your Cholesterol. And I truly, wholeheartedly welcome Bob Buist.
Oh, thanks, Andrew.
Bob, you've been a mentor of mine for many years, and today we're going to be talking about the advantages of whey protein and how it can benefit many areas of human function, dysfunction, and health. So what's so different about whey as opposed to some of the other proteins that we have on the market?
Well, there's now a whole wealth of literature on why whey proteins are really good for just about everything from heart disease to liver problems, kidney function and so on. But the thing that makes me think that whey is an entirely different beast is the composition of the actual amino acids in the whey, together with the fact that when you eat something that's protein, it sits in your stomach for half an hour to maybe 2 hours if it's pork. And all these things are solids. But whey is actually soluble. So when whey, as a protein, as a solid, you can take as a powder, when that hits your stomach acid, it dissolves. And because it dissolves instantly, you get this instant energy. There's access to the digestive enzymes, so you get really good digestion of the whey compared to other protein. This is why it's called fast protein. Mm-hmm. So a slow protein is the other protein in milk called casein. Now, it's not soluble, it's insoluble, but it coagulates and it sits in the stomach for much longer. So there's a really good difference just in that, quite apart from all the other things that we're going to talk about. For example, whey has a lot of amino acids that are really important for muscle building. These are the branched chain amino acids, and particularly leucine. So leucine is the key. It's the linchpin when it comes to manufacturing muscles. And later on we can talk about sarcopenia, which is a loss of muscles as we get older, and it's replaced with fat. But before we do that, the main branched chain amino acids that are in whey, and let's face it, whey is 25 to 30% of the branched chain amino acids are 35, maybe 30% of the actual amino acids in the whey protein itself. And leucine, which is the major one, is about 14%. So it's really, really high. That's right. So you've got leucine, isoleucine and valine. Yep. These are the main ones. So apart from that, you've also got the ability to blunt the postprandial spike in glucose and triglycerides. And this is really important because we now know that triglycerides, keeping the triglyceride levels down, really important, particularly in diabetics, metabolic syndrome and so on. And sugar levels also, because diabetes is such a problem, type 2 diabetes right around the world. So these are just some of the things that I think are fundamentally important. But by far the most overwhelming importance is in cysteine. There's a high level of cysteine, which is one of the non-essential amino acids that's in whey. When you combine cysteine with glutamic acid and glycine, you end up with glutathione. Now, this is the major antioxidant when it comes to the liver, and all sorts of cells in the body rely on glutathione. And for that reason, a lot of the uses of whey relate back to the ability of the body, because it's got these biological spare parts, as I call them, to put together glutathione. So these are just a few of the things that I think separate whey from casein, albumin, pea protein, soy protein and so on, which have the amino acids but don't have this particular composition.
When you're talking about a differential between certainly whey and casein, people often get whey confused with milk, but then also the other proteins is whey's effect on appetite. And what's interesting to me is, baby formula, for instance, is a mixture of whey but also casein. Why was casein chosen, and what are the benefits of whey over casein?
Well, casein is still obviously a protein that can be utilised, and it does have all the amino acids, and it's a very important protein. But as I said, it's a slow protein. However, the whey itself has some amazing effects that casein doesn't have. For example, on some of the hormones that control things like appetite and your hunger, whether you're putting on fat or not too quickly, which is the obesity problem that we have worldwide. So when you're taking whey, what you're doing is you're lowering ghrelin. Now, ghrelin is one of the hormones in the stomach that actually makes you feel hungry. And if you're taking whey, it sort of down regulates the actual production of ghrelin. And at the same time, it increases the production of leptin, which is another hormone that's in fat tissue and can act on the brain. So normally, if you're not sleeping, for example, you're going to lower the levels of leptin and increase the levels of ghrelin. And this is one of the reasons why people that don't sleep well are putting on weight. They don't realise they're eating more calories because their entire hormone system that controls weight reduction, weight problems is changed. And this is really a big problem. Some of the other things that whey does also that casein doesn't, which is, as I said, they're the two major proteins in milk, is that the whey will increase cholecystokinin, and that will make sure that your gallbladder is working, your pancreas is working, and you're digesting. So your whole digestive capacity in the stomach depends on these particular hormones. So the cholecystokinin is up, and incidentally, that comes from glucomacropeptide, which is one of the components of whey, and that it stimulates the cholecystokinin. But also, there's glucagon-like peptide and pancreatic peptide. Now, those are two also that prevent the stomach emptying very quickly. So all the time while you're taking whey protein, you're keeping the food in the stomach digesting, and it's preventing it emptying quickly. You're absorbing things, but you're not emptying it quickly. So what that does is basically control appetite, controls hunger. So if you put that together with the leptin situation, and incidentally, a lot of people don't have low leptin, particularly if they're overweight. They
high leptin, but it doesn't work.
It's right, it doesn't work. So it's insulin insensitivity is exactly the same with the leptin. It's there, but it's not working properly.
So when people talk about, or when you say whey is a fast protein, that's not to say like a fast sugar spike.
No.
Is it? It's totally and utterly different. It's a different concept.
Well, in fact, beta-lactoglobulin is not digested in the stomach, and that's one of the major whey proteins. This is probably the major whey protein. It actually is found intact, virtually intact in the small intestine. So, yeah, there's all sorts of dynamics going on, but all we can say is that after 40 to 60 minutes, there's a peak in the amino acids that you get from whey. And what it does is it's increasing amino acids in the bloodstream, not sugar. And those amino acids, particularly things like the branched chain amino acids and lysine, giving rise to insulin. So the effectiveness of the insulin is very much dependent on having the right amino acid balance. Now, they've actually done some scientific studies showing that the combination of those particular amino acids that are in the whey are controlling insulin production. So with the problem worldwide with insulin at the moment, as I alluded to before with type 2 diabetes, it's nice to have a food that is controlling the production of insulin and insulin sensitivity, which is even
key.
more.
Yeah.
Insulin sensitivity.
Yeah. So when we're talking about some of the unique features of whey, you can damage it though. You can change it though, can't you? You can change the profile from ordinary whey to whey protein concentrate to whey protein isolate, ionized. Then you've got some other sorts. You've got to look after it if you're going to preserve one of the important functions of whey to me, and that's the immune functions.
That's right. Well, there's many ways of producing whey. Usually it's in cheese production. And we can't really heat the whey because if you heat it, you denature it. And I learned in my first year at biochemistry that any protein that you heat over 114 degrees denatures. Now, whether that's true or not, it's a long time ago and I might be a bit out there. But basically, you don't heat things. Now, when we create the whey that we've got at the moment, I mean, incidentally, the actual proportion of casein and whey protein is about 80 to 20% in milk. So if you take the whey, say the whey concentrate, there's whey concentrate and whey isolate. Whey concentrate can be anywhere from 35 to 80% of the actual proteins.
Yeah.
Whey isolate is about 90%, so it's a very purified form. So what happens is it goes through either microfiltration or ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration is actually 4 times less. The holes that are in the filtration process are 4 times less. So you actually are concentrating the large proteins. And what comes through is actually the permeate. And permeate, there's been a lot of publicity on this lately because some of the supermarkets had permeate in their milk, and that's not what you want. So what we're trying to do is to concentrate in the whey concentrate 35 to 80%. Of course, it's much better, I think, to have the 80% whey concentrate. And also, when it comes to the isolate, you're allowing more and more of these substances through and just keeping the high quality proteins.
So can I just clear up for our listeners? So even when you have whey protein concentrate, you can have a vast difference in the amino acid buildup or the amino acid components in that whey protein concentrate.
That's correct. If you have 35% whey protein
That's
concentrate.
a pretty poor quality.
It's poor quality because most of it could be lactose.
Yeah.
And people are so disturbed by having huge amounts of lactose that, that can cause real problems with lactose intolerant people. So it's really good if you're going to use a concentrate to have all the goodies that you need. You don't want to get rid of everything. And in fact, often a concentrate plus an isolate combination is the best.
Right. But when you start to get into those super refined whey protein products, don't you lose out on the immune fractions? Isn't that one of the real reasons to maintain that whey protein concentrate?
No, because you're actually keeping a lot of the immune fractions. It doesn't go through with the permeate, which is what we were just talking about.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're concentrating the immune fractions and the lactalbumins and the lactoglobulins and the bovine serum albumins, all of those are intact, and that's whether it's in the isolate or in the concentrate. So the only thing that comes through, that's why the permeate is something that people don't really need because it's just lactose. There is some minerals and things in there, but basically we want the other goodies.
And what about things like, the cysteine components? You mentioned that it was in there, but you've got a cysteine and cysteine.
That's right.
Can you explain that and how that functions with, say, glutathione or detox?
Okay. The cysteine is in a very high proportion, particularly in like beta-lactoglobulin, and that I think there's about 14 cysteine residues, and same with alpha-lactalbumin and bovine serum albumin. They all have very high levels of cysteine.
Yep.
And those high levels of cysteine are really important because cysteine is the rate limiting, if you like, step in the production of the glutathione. So if you're actually trying to increase glutathione in the body, one of the best ways, in the past we thought that we weren't able to make glutathione by taking oral cysteine and oral glutamic acid and glycine. Now we know, yes, that can happen, but what we do know also is that free-form amino acids in whatever form are often metabolized more quickly by the body. So even if you're taking cysteine or you're taking glutamine, they're still going to be metabolized out one way or another. Yeah. Whereas when you're taking them as whey protein, you then hydrolyze them into peptides. So glycinyl cysteine and glutamyl cysteine are much more effectively converted into glutathione. That's what they have found, which is why one of the great ways of taking glutathione, although there are some new supplements that are very effective, but one of the great foods, if you like, that's going to give us also, and that can augment whatever we're doing supplementally, is to take it with whey protein. So then you've got the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, indeed, I often prefer whey to help with supporting my cancer patients through their therapy, because it's got a twofold action. One is to maintain their weight, and one of the worst things that they can get is weight loss during their chemo or radiotherapy. The second one is that it's improving their glutathione status, and so it's helping their immune system as well. And it's just a double whammy benefit to my patients.
And I think that most of the real importance of having whey proteins, particularly for many patients with many different clinical conditions, is because of this cysteine component. And when it comes to muscles, also the glutamine component and the branched chain amino acids. So you can see that, not all the proteins that we're dealing with, particularly when it goes into supplementation, food supplements, you just don't get that sort of combination of amino acids that you do in the whey protein concentrate and isolate.
I should point out one of the last benefits that I see in the whey protein is because it tastes good. And a lot of the protein supplements taste pretty horrific.
That is so true. It's so true. And, I've been involved with putting together whey supplements now for many, many years. And the more I do it, the more I realise that what you said is almost the key. People say, but it tastes so good, because if you taste some of the other proteins that are out there.
Horrible.
They're not too good, are they?
and, when you're talking about those people that have got a particular hurdle to overcome, let's say, because they're nauseous during their chemotherapy, it's got to make it easy for them to take. But also elderly people, people who can't afford good, nutritious food because of their pensioners. And it's really important for them to get a highly nutritious meal that's going to help maintain muscle mass in these people, particularly because of sarcopenia.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Absolutely. And sarcopenia is becoming a real relevant thing, because now we know that as we get older, particularly when we hit around 40 and 50, we do have a tendency to start losing muscles, and instead it's replaced with fat. And this fat is also associated with inflammation, cytokine production, and so on. So the sarcopenia won't occur as readily if we have plenty of the growth hormone, testosterone and insulin, particularly in guys, because these are the hormones that actually keep our muscles. But as they decline, say when we're 50, 60, 70, as that decline, the other thing we can do is we can take something like whey protein simply because it's so high in leucine, isoleucine and valine. So we're starting to hang on to our muscle to make more muscle. Also, glutamine is really important, because glutamine is the major amino acid that's in whey. That's why I like whey so much, because if you want to hang on to your muscles, not only are you manufacturing, but you also don't want to lose your muscles. And there's a whole story on that too when it comes to – and incidentally, before I move on to that story, if you combine the combination of, say, the branched chain amino acids that we just mentioned with the cysteine and the glutamine together with resistance exercise, this is the formula for hanging onto your muscles as you get older. So a lot of guys out there I know, they're thinking, whoa, it used to be easy to lose weight, and now I'm putting it on around the middle. My arms are getting flabby and whatever. Well, you can You can stop this happening by having the right protein and by doing the resistance training that we're talking about. But what I was going to get into, and I don't know whether it's relevant to get into it now, but the combination of cysteine and glutamine is absolutely critical. And the glutamine-cysteine ratio is absolutely fundamental when it comes to talking about sarcopenia and hanging on or losing muscle. So what normally happens, if you're going to lose your muscle, say in sarcopenia, you get a movement of the cysteine into the liver, and it's actually converted to sulfate ions and protons. And this is going to inhibit urea production. So when you're breaking down protein from muscle, so you're losing your muscles, that is going to generate a lot of ammonia that's converted into urea. You want to stop that. Now, the way you stop that is that the body naturally, if it's got the cysteine, now it has to have the cysteine in the first place, moves into the liver, is converted into sulfate and protons, and it then, instead of, it actually inhibits the production of urea from ammonia, and the ammonia is then diverted into glutamic acid, which then goes back into the bloodstream and then goes back into the muscles to become glutamine.
So is that why glutamic acid was originally thought to inhibit urea production?
Yes, I think that's probably the reason, because that was obviously high in the liver at the time, because that was what it was doing. It was moving the ammonia instead of into urea into glutamic acid. So you can see why to have a protein source that's high in glutamine, i.e., your main amino acid for muscles, and high in cysteine, which can regulate the breakdown of muscle protein. And guess what? You've got all this in whey protein. So this is a fantastic thing to have, and it's one of the reasons why the fundamental way that you hang on to your muscles as you get older is to have whey protein shakes together with resistance exercise. Those two are the fundamental two things, and there's a hell of a lot of scientific literature that actually supports that.
One of the things that's really interesting me at the moment is a recent study was talking about antioxidants worsen tumour growth. And they were speaking about an isolated, quote-unquote, antioxidant, which I think we need to get rid of that term, but anyway, N-acetylcysteine. And what they were looking at was the amount of glutathione that was in the cancer cells. How do you ratify the use of whey, which helps in glutathione production, in cancer patients?
It's a very good question. And the jury is still out to a certain extent, but sometimes we can get too clever for ourselves in science, and we have all the theories and we can work it all out. But, basically, if you give whey to people with breast cancer and prostate cancer, and hang on, it helps them. And it helps them in a way that I think these are some of the theories of what's going on. In the cancer cell, you've actually got an increase in glutathione. In the other cells of the body, there may be a decrease at the same time. So, what is going on here? Is it stealing glutathione from the surrounding cells? Is it trying to compensate for the fact that there is a hell of amount of disorder? There's oxidant damage, there's carcinogens, there's free radical production. So it needs extra glutathione. However, when you actually take, and this is animal studies mainly this comes from, when you actually take whey protein, there is a decrease of glutathione in the cancer cells. There's a lack of accumulation of glutathione in the cancer cells. And guess what? The other cells of the body start accumulating.
Yeah.
So this means, supposing you're undergoing chemotherapy or you're undergoing radiotherapy. Now, I'm not in agreement with a lot of this, but if you do, you're protecting the rest of your cells and making the cancer cells more vulnerable.
That's right. To me, it was one of the key issues is that whey also has some action in dampening inflammatory responses,
right,
as well.
It does. So, and we know that inflammation is associated with all chronic degenerative diseases. So at the moment, there's still more research is definitely needed. We don't understand how, but the main thing is that the research so far, particularly on animals, is showing this particular strange phenomena that the glutathione can be reduced in the cancer cells while the other cells are being increased in their glutathione.
I think one of the other points is that when people are looking at one single supplement as a a magic bullet. They're really barking down the wrong tree.
Absolutely.
Barking down the wrong path. And I love your term, the biological spare parts. They work in tandem. These things work as a team. They don't work in singularity.
No.
So if you're going to give a huge amount of N-acetylcysteine and you're going to upregulate, quote-unquote, glutathione, okay, so my question is, what about its redox partner?
Absolutely.
What about the enzymes? What are you doing there? What are you actually feeding? What are you actually upsetting? To me, it's a very dangerous and reductionist mentality to sort of go. So what they're going to do is they're going to blame NAC, and then, of course, NAC gets a bad mark because of some silly study that was done in a reductionist way.
Exactly.
Dumb.
And I mean, this has been my hobby horse for the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, you've heard me rave about this so many times. There's a difference between pharmacology and biochemistry.
You got it.
And in biochemistry, you know, you have this many, many different pathways of many, many mechanisms. It's an orchestra, and they're all playing together in the right sort of tune. Pharmacology is a single agent that gets in, controls the mode of action and the manipulates cell behaviour. But this is not what we're dealing with in complementary medicine. We are dealing with all of these different biological molecules, and they are biological spare parts, and we do need to give them together. That's why we believe that you need to have tocotrienols and tocopherols as an absolute orchestra of these things. And when you give flavonoids and carotenoids, you know, let's give the full set together with whatever we're augmenting at the same time. And, you know, if I can just, as a little offshoot, you know, I also believe that everyone's down on palmitic acid, you know, it's saturated fat and so on. But, you know, when you actually have the palmitic acid together with linoleic acid, oleic acid, stearic acid, which in fact is saturated fat, you don't have exactly the same situation. So what we're doing,
the isolated component.
The isolated palmitic acid is going to give you entirely different results to if you eat the full complement that exists in nature. And this is the whole point. When you look at some of these studies, the top scientists, and they're only looking at one of these features, which is pharmacology. They're pulling out a single nutrient. You have to look at the full schmear. And in fact, you know, for those that are listening to this, realise that saturated fat, when it comes to beef, is 45% of the beef fat is actually oleic acid. Now, that's a monounsaturated. That's actually good for the heart and everything. I won't go into it now, but it's a hobby horse of mine. But, you know, it gets back to what we were saying. We need to have, when we're looking at biochemistry and we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at foods, we need to have all of those micronutrients together.
When we're looking, you mentioned earlier about diabetes, and it's rife within our community. And we're set for an explosion of diabetes and heart disease and the associated healthcare costs with that, running into the hundreds of billions. Like I think the latest one was 187 billion projected.
It's huge.
Massive. When you're looking at the sequelae of that or the attendant comorbidities that happen with diabetes, you've got blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, increased triglycerides, everything like that. Where can Whey help in managing diabetes?
Well, you know what? You've just put your finger on them. You've just mentioned them. That's what's so interesting. When it comes to metabolic syndrome, obesity, problems with ischemic heart disease, for example, all of those conditions, when you've put Whey into the formula, into the diet of people that have those particular conditions, you're immediately changing the blood sugar levels. You are changing the lipid profile. You are making the insulin more reactive, more sensitive. So insulin resistance starts waning away. The blood pressure that was a problem starts coming down. Even, and they've done some interesting studies on the arterial stiffness. So this is also going to change because, and mechanistically we don't know exactly why, but I would guarantee it's something to do with glutathione production, to do with cysteine, to do with muscles and so on. And we're giving such an amazing supplement with the Whey that's actually having an effect on all these things, but particularly when you're thinking also of inflammation. We mentioned before that whenever you've got fat, now it doesn't matter whether it's around the middle, whether it's visceral fat or it's fat in the arteries, you've still got inflammation. You've got an increase in the interleukins, interleukin 1 and 6. You've got an increase in tumor necrosis factor alpha. You've got C-reactive protein increased. You've got some of the complement 4 increase. All of that means that inflammation needs to be handled.
Yeah.
And Whey is generating this glutathione all the time. And that's what's so beautiful about it.
So when we're looking at people who have got, let's say, a pre-existing diagnosis of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and they're probably already on blood pressure medication, an anti-diabetic medication, possibly a heart medication as well. Can you talk to me about the safety of whey when people have got these meds?
Well, look, the beauty of it is that everybody on a daily basis eats protein. And this is the best form of protein. It's got all the essential amino acids for a start. I don't know any other protein that has more of the important essential amino acids that we can't make. We have to get from outside. We can't make in our body. So it's biologically more usable than any other form of protein. I mean, the next one is albumin, which is egg protein. That's quite biologically usable. It doesn't taste very good, like you pointed out before, and rightfully so.
I have a long-standing joke. When I used to consult in a pharmacy, there was the bodybuilding section, and there was always one tin of egg protein, and it would almost go out of date before some meathead would come in and buy it, right? Who preferred it, but there was only ever one.
Exactly.
Nobody ever liked it.
No. So, to answer your question, in a nutshell, I mean, it is a food, and it does not have the problems. The only possible problem with proteins on a whole is with the kidneys. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about kidneys?
Yes, because I remember a patient actually, and it was something that I found out about, but a patient taking whey protein actually did better. And they were in early stage renal failure. Right. And they did better. And their specialist said, whatever you're doing, continuing, I just don't want to know about it.
Yeah. Well, there's a really interesting story on that. But basically, remember the Atkins diet?
Yeah.
And the paleo diet, when people started off, it was just meat. Now we know differently. We have to have vegetables. We have to have fibre. We have to look after the microbiome, particularly in the lower bowel. We have to have it acidic. We have to prevent leaky bowel. We have to make sure that the bugs are the right sort of bugs, no endotoxin coming in, no endotoxemia, thank you very much. And we have to make these fatty acids like your lactic acid, propionic acid, butyric acid. Yep. That's a whole other story. But the point is that now, if we're eating protein, a high-protein diet is going to increase the glomerular filtration rate. So it will do that. But we have to have a balanced diet with it. We have to have vegetable matter and fibre and all the other things too. So don't go off on this strange new religion called high protein, meaning that it only means high protein. So we've got to balance that. Now, having said that, there are some people that have kidney disease that do have renal failure. Now, we do need to cut the protein down with these people. We need to watch out for magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, and a whole lot of things. However, what you were alluding to before is that because the whey protein is high in branched chain amino acids, this is an interesting situation because it means that those with kidney disease that have whey protein as the source of protein have a much better nutrition, they have better kidney function, and because of that, they also have better brain function, and the ammonia that build up is handled better, and so on. So as far as I can see from the literature at the moment, by giving whey protein as the source of protein in people with kidney failure, it's a much better alternative because of the high level of branched chain amino acids. As we said before, could be 25% of all of the protein could be the branched chain amino acids.
But you've got to have well-prepared whey protein.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a different thing. You can't just say whey protein because there's so many different sorts.
That's right. And I mean, you need to actually get as pure as possible. You need it to be not denatured. It can't be, heated up. And it's got to be purified so that you have the right sort of immunoglobulins and the right sort of proteins we mentioned before. So, yeah, and it needs to be very pure.
What about whey protein influencing triglyceride levels? Because this is a huge huge problem in diabetics.
It is. And I think one of the things is that as soon as you want to get the triglycerides down, you've got to get rid of sugar. sugar must go, because sugar is one of the most important ways the world is increasing its triglyceride levels.
Yeah.
And if you get rid of that together with refined flours and some of the cakes and biscuits and all the things, then you're well on the way to bringing the triglycerides down. And of course, you can throw in a few omega-3 oils too. We do know that over a period of time, that's also going to
high
help.
doses, yeah.
But what it does is interesting is that the whey protein, as we mentioned before, this has a profound effect on the gastrointestinal tract. And what it does is the postprandial triglyceride levels and the glucose levels that often rise, the whey protein dampens down that particular rise. So that, for example, if you were to take 18 grams of whey protein together with 25 grams of glucose, if you looked at the glucose tolerance test curve, the area under the curve would be decreased 56% by having the whey with the glucose. So
as opposed to 25 grams of glucose alone.
As opposed to 25 grams glucose. So it bluntens that rise.
Yeah.
And the same, if you were to give it with casein, you're only getting about a 31% effect compared to 56. So once again, whey is ahead of the pack when it comes to not only controlling the rise in glucose levels, but also the rise in triglycerides, because which is much more sophisticated in the way in which the triglycerides are forming and so on in the liver and going into the bloodstream and that. But it's still, there is a blunting of that spike.
We spoke about the whey and its impact on inflammatory cytokine production. And certainly we know that putting a pressure on the liver from permeable guts that are damaged by bad foods and stress and all that sort of thing. Can whey help to repair that and reduce things like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or, the pre-diabetic sort of syndrome?
It can, and again, it's getting back to the level of cysteine particularly, because with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and the steatohepatitis and eventually cirrhosis of the liver, that entire thing is one continuum, and it just depends on where you're actually hitting it. But it is an inflammatory disorder, and you'll find that the liver enzymes, ALT, AST, will go down when you take the whey. The fatty infiltration of the liver will go down.
Will retard, yeah.
You are increasing glutathione in the liver when you're taking whey. So there is a profound effect on those with metabolic syndrome and obesity that have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And I think this is absolutely fascinating. But to get it back again to that idea that it's the glutamylcysteine and the glycinylcysteine residues in the whey that seem to be behind what's happening with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at all. So there's this thread of glutathione precursors running through everything from the kidney disease, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, through the heart disease. All of it seems to be related to inflammation and the way in which whey can dampen down inflammation.
Can you answer a long-standing question of mine that I've been pondering for years?
I'll try, Andrew.
So I remember, that di and tripeptides were more easily absorbed. That was the form that we preferred to absorb them in.
Yes.
People talk about quote-unquote glutathione precursors, but they're actually the single free-form amino acids. Are di and tripeptides better absorbed out of the human intestinal tract? And how does that affect glutathione preformed being absorbed?
Well, we have the ability to take in free-form amino acids. These are generated to a certain extent in the gut, but not too much. So what happens, the aminopeptidases in the actual wall of the gut in the small intestine have the ability, the aminopeptidases, to take in these peptides, and then they generate the amino acids, and then you've got the carriers like albumin and so on that carry the free-form amino acids through the bloodstream. So it's not a matter of whether the amino acids in a free form are absorbed as much. It's just that the major way in which these amino acids get in is as the peptide, tripeptide, dipeptide, and then they're handled by the body in a certain way. So I guess there is some sort of framework or a way in which the body is used to handling peptides in a way that it can structure things like the glutathione and that from glycinol cysteine, glutamyl cysteine, and that is the best way to form glutathione rather than throw in some cysteine and valine and proline and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's right. You can't guarantee the amount of glutathione production that's going to happen from free-form amino acids as opposed to its dipeptide.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's correct.
Yeah, precursor.
That's correct.
So what about people, we've spoken about diabetic, we've spoken about heart disease. What about people with existing liver disease, like, for instance, hepatitis? Huge issue. And particularly things like hep C. You know, very, very bad, high risk of hepatocellular carcinoma progression. Does Whey have a role to play in these patients?
Look, it does seem to, because people that take Whey tend to have a reduction in viral load and also a reduction in inflammation. So again, it's getting back to this inflammatory area, the cytokines, all of the things that we've talked about. I mean, it's like we're repeating ourselves all the time, but, you know, it's the same things that are within the Whey amino acid structure that are affecting. Now, a lot of the work has been done on animals at the moment, but the fact that the viral load is down, I think there was one study with humans, with 27 humans compared to 15 controls, and they did find in those humans there was a reduction in the viral load, and also the liver enzymes came down, AST particularly, which, you know, fluctuates. But it came down, ALT, all of the liver enzymes came down together with the viral and the inflammation. Not only did it go down, but guess what? The glutathione level started rising. So this is interesting stuff, isn't it? It's the same old story that keeps coming through with many of these disorders where there is inflammation involved.
So in general detox, you know, there's normally been this aversion of anything to do with a cow apart from meat, any secretion from a cow when you're talking about detox. And I think it's because practitioners tend to think whey equals milk, and it's not. They're vastly different in their protein milk makeup. Do you have any hesitancies using whey in those patients undergoing a detox?
No, I don't. It depends on what you're trying to detox. Are you trying to detox heavy metals? Are you trying to detox organochlorines? Is it a lot of you're running next to the road and you've got a lot of car fumes? You're working in an industry that's full of solvents and you want to get rid of the solvents. But on a whole, because of the features that we've just mentioned on the whey protein, I don't see it as a problem. And in any case, a lot of people, I think, that have dairy allergies or that have a problem with dairy products don't understand that often you can take whey even though you can't take some of the other dairy products because, number one, if it's the right sort of whey combination, particularly with the isolate and the whey protein concentrated at about 80%, you've got hardly any lactose, so you don't have a lactose sensitivity. You've removed a lot of the casein, so if it was a casein problem, that's gone. The only thing is that beta-lactoglobulin can be a problem, particularly for very young children. So you need to be a little bit careful, I think, with young children, although even that is changing as to what the mother should be doing during pregnancy. In this idea of taking out all dairy, you know, get rid of all gluten, get rid of all these things, and you're going to protect the child is not valid anymore. No. You've got to expose the mother to what the child is going to get in utero, and then the self and non-self adjustment in the child, the major histocompatibility factors and that are formed in a much more meaningful way. Yeah. So
it's called antigenic ambivalence, isn't it?
Well,
a little bit of exposure to them, not huge, but a little bit of exposure to these so-called offending things, and then, or actually keep it in equilibrium.
That's right. And then the baby is going to be born into a world, and of course they've already been exposed to some of these things, and the immune system is ready to take on that.
What about other factors that you might think of with regards to using with whey maybe that might help increase glutathione production? Well,
firstly, one that we haven't mentioned is blood pressure. There's some real – it's not glutathione, but it gets back to the peptides that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Fonterra were working on certain peptides within the whey fraction to reduce blood pressure. And I got in touch with them and I was trying to get a little bit more information, but unsuccessfully because I guess it's a top secret.
They know who you are.
I do know that now in Japan, I've just come back from Japan about a month ago, and they've got a product over there called A-meal, A-M-E-A-L, and it's found in sour milk, and it's a peptide that's from whey in sour milk, and it's valine and proline. So it's a tripeptide of valine, proline, and proline. Mm-hmm. They also have isoleucine and proline. So they are out there, but at this particular juncture, there's not enough real good research, I think, to say, well, this is the one that you would take to lower blood pressure. And I think the reason for that is that the reasons for having high blood pressure can be due to a failure in your kidney. It could be the, we mentioned arterial stiffness. It could be your lungs. It could be the baroreceptors. It could be your heart not working properly. So so many mechanisms can be involved.
Peripheral resistance.
Free radical damage. I mean, it goes on and on. So just to say, well, this is the peptide you'd need, I think is a bit simplistic. Yeah.
That's to do with the condition rather than the trying to simplify the treatment.
Exactly. And we're more interested in etiology. We're more interested in the causes and what's going on behind the scenes, not the condition.
Bob, I love the way, certainly your expansive knowledge on not just whey but everything else. And you've been a mentor of mine for, over 2 decades now. I've got to personally thank you for that one. Well, you really did. You formed me. You formed how I question things.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you.
Yeah, I really appreciate
it. That's good.
So thank you so much for taking our listeners through the applications of whey in so many different disorders today. So I really thank you for that.
No, that's a pleasure.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today on FX Medicine, please engage with us and let us know what further topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in contact with us through our website, fxmedicine.com.au, or look for FX Medicine in your favourite social media platform. You can also rate and review us on iTunes, and we'd really like to thank those who have already rated us. It's through your continued support that enables us to bring you current, complex and relevant topics to enhance your practice of natural medicine.